From Unity of Houston, Texas, this is the Awakened Life with Reverend Howard Caesar. Unity is a non-denominational spiritual community providing a positive, practical, and progressive approach to Christianity. Let's join the service in progress now with Reverend Howard Caesar.
So one morning, a grandmother was surprised to find her grandson, 7-year-old grandson, had made her coffee that morning. And so, smiling, she choked down the worst cup of coffee in her life. And when she finished, she found 3 little green army men at the bottom. And puzzled, she said, "Honey, what are these little army men doing in my coffee?" And her grandson answered and said, "Well, like it says on TV, Grandma, the best part of waking up is soldiers in your coffee." Children take things literally. So do some adults, you know. So on the annual holiday that we call Memorial Day, we remember and honor all those real soldiers, those who have served our country, those who have given their lives, but basically, certainly all those who have served. And, you know, war is a horrible thing. I mean, it really is. And it is the height of internal conflict boiling up into a physical kind of expression. It all starts with inner conflict that makes its way into expression in the outer, really. And then humanity becomes involved in the horrific activity, unfortunately, of human beings killing human beings. And it's gone on for centuries, and there's nothing pleasant or good about it. It's horrible. And it is the height of extreme separation consciousness in the world. And it is hopefully countered by the spiritual teachings and practices of those of a oneness consciousness, really, and it requires people of the oneness consciousness and of that kind of energy to offset the conflicting consciousness that exists in this world, or things would really go over the cliff, really. It is said, those who live by the sword die by the sword. Moses, of course, brought out in the 10 Commandments, "Thou shalt not kill." So it goes against our spiritual nature. And my heart really has always gone out to those who have had to wrestle with the role of having to take another's life in order to protect family and country. That's an inner conflict that every soul has to be confronted with. Jesus said, "The Father and I are one." And he wanted us to know and experience everything that he had come to know and experience. It wasn't just like, you know, I have this, you don't. It was, I want you to have everything I have come to know and experience of my God. And so Jesus, of course, was of the consciousness he could do no harm to anyone or anything, because he understood it's all God. Everything, it's all God. And he was about bringing in and ushering in the whole idea of love and oneness. And so, obviously, we all want to avoid war in the world. We pray that it goes away where it does exist. And that's why it's so important, I think, for great masses of people, including us, you and me, are to help extinguish the war consciousness, the conflicting consciousness, by building and creating a unified kind of creative spiritual consciousness of knowing that we really are all connected, we really are all one, to offset energetically in that realm where everything is woven together in a collective kind of consciousness. You know, even Einstein, he had a very spiritual base and core to him, and he felt this very thing was extremely important that we're talking about here, and that our survival depended upon a transition from this separation, conflict-filled kind of consciousness to an expanded level that would reflect the idea of unity and of oneness. And he said, quote, "A human being is part of the whole, called by us universe, a part limited in time and space. He goes on to say, he experiences his thoughts and feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. And this delusion is a kind of prison for us, restricting us to our personal decisions and to the affection of a few persons nearest us. Our task, he says, must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening our circle of compassion to embrace all living creatures and the whole of nature and its beauty. He had that bigger picture that we're all connected. It's all God. And that's our task, is to live with this widening circle of compassion. And Einstein felt so strong about this that he actually even wrote a letter to the president back in 1950. And the president at that time was Truman. And he was hinting about this idea of widening our circle of compassion. And that if we didn't really, there was a risk of global devastation. And one of the lines in that letter stated this, quote, he said, "I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." And what he meant that if we get into a global World War III, it will be so devastating that all that would be left to fight with would be sticks and stones. He was aware of what man can do with the technology and the learning that he has if he doesn't direct that in creative, productive, and constructive ways. Some of you may have noticed on TV, yesterday actually, there was a bit about BLT. And it's not a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich. It was about a bear, a leopard, and a tiger, and how they were raised in captivity. They were found and they weren't being taken care of by the owner, and they were stuffed away somewhere, and they were really in bad shape, but they had hung together, these three. And then whoever took them cared for them together, and they grew up together. And they showed these now adult, a bear, a leopard, and a tiger, and the tremendous affection that was being shown. They were just hugging and licking and hugging and nudging, and oh, it was beautiful. It just touched your heart, and it just showed you even it can go against the instincts to be the enemy, sort of, in the lands of survival. That, when it all comes down to it, we really, are one. It was a beautiful thing to see. Einstein, he was reflecting the importance of unity and oneness, which also was contained, obviously, in the teachings of Jesus, that we're all one. And even Ralph Waldo Emerson really aligned and grasped the importance of this very thing that we're talking about, that we're all one. In one of his essays, he talks about the oversoul. And some of you may have read some of his essays, but really it's the implication that you and I are not only an individual soul that is evolving and awakening and progressing and transforming, but that we have a soul, but that there is a collective soul, the soul of the collective, that all of you and all of us go into making up one soul, the oversoul. And Emerson calls the oversoul, he says, it is, quote, that unity within which every man's particular being is contained and made one with all other. It's beautiful. The oversoul is that unity within which every man's particular being is contained and made one with all other. And he went on to explain, he said, we live in succession, in division, in parts, in particles. And in the meantime, within man is the soul of the whole, the wise, silence, the universal beauty, to which every part and particle is equally related, the eternal one. We're all connected as part of the eternal one. in a bigger way. And he goes on to say, and this deep power in which we exist and whose beatitude is all accessible to us is not only self-sufficiency and perfect in every hour, but the act of seeing and the thing seen, the seer and the spectacle, the subject and the object are one. We see the world piece by piece as the sun, the moon, the animal, the tree, but the whole of which these are shining parts is the soul. And so he's saying, you can point all these things out, and the person sitting next to you or whatever, but we're, it looks like they're pieces and they're parts apart from us, but they're part of a whole. We're all in a whole, the oversoul. So today, really, my topic that I want to touch upon is around our walk with God, and this idea of realizing that we are a part of a greater whole and the importance of that. You see, God is within us, God is with us, God is all around us, in the tree, in the sky, in the other person. We are all parts of a greater whole. We're all part of one soul. And it's for us to understand that and to expand and broaden into that, broaden the circle of compassion, as Einstein talked about it. And so, there's a cute story about an older man and a young child in this process of understanding that it's all God. And from the mouths of babes, this story goes like this. There's an old man who sat in his rocker day after day on his front porch, and he promised that he was going to stay in that chair and not remove himself until he saw God. And so one day he was in his rocking chair there on the porch and rocking along, and the young girl that lived across the street was playing, and her ball came across into his yard. And so as she bent down to pick up the ball, she looked at this old man, and she said, "Mr. Old Man, I see you every day rocking in your chair and staring off into nothing. What is it you're looking for?" And he said, "Child, you're yet too young to understand." And she said, "Maybe, but my mama says it's always better to talk about it. Mama says, Miss Lizzie, share your thoughts. Share, share, share. She says it helps. You can get a better understanding." Well, maybe I can't help, but I can listen. And so finally he said, "All right, Miss Lizzie, child, I'm looking for God." Miss Lizzie had this puzzled look that came on her face, and she said, "With all due respect, Mr. Old Man, sir, you rock back and forth in that chair day after day in search of God?" And he said, "Yes, I need to believe before my death that there is a God. I need a sign, and I have yet to have seen one." And she said, "A sign, sir? A sign, Mr. Old Man, sir? God gives you a sign when you breathe your next breath, when you smell fresh flowers, when you hear the birds sing, when all the babes are born. Sir, God gives you a sign when you laugh and when you cry, when you feel the tears roll from your eyes. It's a sign in your heart to hug and to love. God gives you a sign in the wind and in the rainbows and in the change of the seasons. All the signs are there. But do you not believe in them? Mr. Old Man, sir, God is in you and God is in me. God is in me. There's no searching because he, she, or whatever is just here all the time." Mama says, "Miss Lizzie, if you're searching for something monumental, you have closed your eyes, because to see God is to see simple things. To see God is to see life in all things." That's what Mama says. The old man said, "Miss Lizzie, you are quite insightful in your knowledge of God, but this that you speak of is yet not quite enough." And so then Lizzie walked up to the man and placed her little hands over his heart and said softly into his ear, "Sir, it comes from here, not out there. Find it in your heart and even in your own mirror. Then, Mr. Old Man, sir, you will see the signs." And then she walked back across the street. Beautiful little story in the lives of children, you know. The signs are all around us. That's the point that the little child is making. And she sees them and feels them and lives her life in an awareness of that. And that's important, you see, because we need to understand that with our mind, we can either use it or be abused by it, all right? The mind can often be the very barrier that stands between us and God or between us and our greater good. Because you have to either begin to master the mind or the mind will master you. One or the other is in charge. That's what awareness is about, and that's what awakening is. Mastering your mind is the process of, to a degree, silencing the mind and then stepping back and being an observer and a witness of the mind, not necessarily identifying with everything that passes through the mind. Okay? And so then you use the mind and you learn to use the mind because we all have one and we need it. You use it as a tool because we all know that it is productive. Thoughts held in mind produce. They produce after their kind. And so we have to be vigilant in terms of doing mental house cleaning from time to time and mental maintenance. It's part of life. That's part of the spiritual path. It truly is. And it also is part of the spiritual path to decide on a regular basis, being awake and aware and conscious, who's in authority? Who has authority in the mind? You know, is it my past that has authority over me? Is it my ego that has authority over me? The ego that edges God out, that is always bringing in a vision or a thought or an idea that puts me in fear and separation. Or do I give my authority to a higher self that lives in me? Some years ago, it was a midweek service we had, and we hosted 8 lamas and monks from Tibet. And it was wonderful. This was about 15 or 20 years ago. They presented their native songs and dances and rituals and of the Buddhist tradition. And one of the interesting things to me is that they got around to displaying a practice that they had as monks that was a debate. And you'd have a young monk and an older monk. And the older monk was really conveying to the younger monk that hadn't really been around yet the truth and spiritual ideas. And they were speaking in their traditional language, so you didn't know what they said, but you got in the exchange the power that came from the elder monk, the knowingness, the authority that he had from the experience of knowing to this younger monk that hadn't really had the experience, hadn't had his eyes open. And so they would, you know, he would shout loud and fast and, you know, and it was da 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 da. And he would clap his hands right in front of the face of the young monk as if, wake up, this is your truth, you know, and he'd didn't give a series of statements, da, 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 and he'd go towards them and it's really cool. And I never forgot that because it was like, although he was a distance away, he was slapping his hands in front of my face. Because he was saying, wake up, you know? Wake up, there's a truth here. And the truth comes from the person who has the experience, you know? And we're all in the process of that waking up. And we all have a higher authority, just like that older monk attuned himself to a higher authority that he could speak from and live from. Call it the Holy Spirit, call it the Christ within, call it your higher self, the God within, whatever. But God will show us the way and reveal his presence in a multitude of ways if we are awake and we know who's in authority in terms of our living our life. Inner promptings will be there to show us. My friend, colleague, prayer partner, Mary M., shared with me a true story about a person and a unique experience that this person had. Her family went on a trip to Michigan from the state of Washington at the time, and they were visiting. All the relatives were getting together, and her name was Donna, and she went with her 38-year-old son and his wife and children, and then they met up with others of Donna's children, And they were all having a great time there in Michigan. And one of the days they went water skiing, and the oldest son, who she had accompanied on the trip, Jeremy, her oldest son, 38, was in a tragic boating accident and was killed. And so weeks after the funeral, she was devastated, and even though she had other children, she just couldn't let this go, and was depressed. She couldn't go on. It was like her life was over. 6 weeks later, she was still in this dark depression, and it had now come to be her birthday. And she was sitting in a chair in her den for hours, all alone, immobilized, thinking about it being her birthday and how much she hurt that her son was gone. And while she was sitting there, she was just staring off into space, staring at the walls, and then something took over in her that started to keep directing her eyes towards a particular book on the bookshelf. And it went on for a while, and finally it was like an inner voice told her to go and go for that book. And she couldn't, where she was sitting, even see the title of it. It was just one book that she kept being taken toward. And so finally she got up and went over and pulled the book from the shelf and opened it. And as she opened it, there was a paper that fell out. And what fell out was a handmade card. And on the front of it, it had little hearts that were drawn, and it had a flower. And it was clearly a child's drawing. And she opened it up, and inside it said, "Happy birthday, Mommy. Love, Jeremy." 30 years earlier, she had opened that card from her son, Jeremy. Written on the card, age 7. Wanted to keep it, put it in a book, put it on the shelf, and had forgotten about it ever since. And she was so touched by the message of love that was somehow conveyed and communicated by her son through God on her birthday in that moment. And she realized in that moment that the presence of God, the divine presence, is with you, and made it possible for her to find that card on her birthday, a time when she needed it so much and was hurting. She truly felt that God was there, and God reveals his presence for her that day and in other ways going forward, helping her to heal the past, helping her to just know that God is there to help her. As Emerson said, "Let us be silent that we may hear the whispers of the gods." We are all called really to establish an interior orientation to life, where we look within first and then out. Everything moves from center to circumference, as we like to say. Seek ye first the kingdom consciousness that lives within, and all things outwardly will be yours for good as well. But it starts within. We talk that, we teach that. It's not easy, folks. You know, it's not easy. It is a journey, and it is a process. It is an evolution that we go through, but we have to begin with the desire to do it, and we have to ask the divine to help us, because we are in partnership with the divine. And we need to have the desire for that level of partnership that is meant to occur. Our understanding of God and our relationship with God can go through many twists and turns, ups and downs, stops and starts during a lifetime. Have they not? Have we not all on our path had some twists and turns, ups and downs, and starts and stops with our relationship with God? It's an evolution. We keep evolving. There's a story about the evolution of consciousness that a person can go through. You may find yourself in this story. I share it with you. It goes like this. It's a metaphor, really. At first, I saw God as my observer, my judge, keeping track of things I did wrong, so as to know whether I merited heaven or hell when I die. He was out there like some sort of president. I knew about him, but I didn't really know him. Later on, when I met God, it seemed as though my life were rather like a bike ride. But it was a tandem ride, and I noticed that God was in the back, helping me pedal, helping me go forward. I don't know when it was that God suggested we trade places, but life has not been the same since. When I had control, I thought I knew the way. Sometimes it was boring, but it was always predictable. Seemed like the shortest distance between 2 points. But when I let God take the lead, oh, God knew delightful ways. Sometimes even what seemed like long cuts. But up mountains, through rocky places, sometimes at breakneck speeds, sometimes so slow it seemed like we were hardly moving. But even though it looked strange at times, or like madness at times, or like nothing was happening at other times, I always felt the presence. And I felt the presence say, just keep pedaling. Stay with me, I know where we're going. And when I would get worried and anxious and ask, where are you taking me? I'd just feel a comforting chuckle, and I learned to trust. I learned I didn't always have to know. I learned to enter into the adventure. When I'd say, I'm scared, I'd feel the presence lean back to me, touch my hand, and I'd feel comforted. And God took me places I wouldn't have gone. God took me to people with gifts that I needed. Gifts of healing, gifts of acceptance, gifts of joy, even gifts of challenge, in which I learned things I would never have learned. And every place I went, I received a gift to take on my journey. And then we'd be off again. And God would say, give the gifts away. They're too much baggage if you just hang on to them, too much weight. And I learned to give the gifts that I had received away. And to the people we met, to every person that we met, we gave something. And I found that in giving, I received even more. And still our burden was light. I did not trust God at first. I wanted to be in control of my life. I thought God would wreck it. Isn't that strange? But God knows bike secrets. God knows how to make the bend. The bike bend and take sharp corners. Knows how to jump and clear high rocks. Knows how to fly in short and scary places. And I'm learning to shut up. Even in the strangest places, I'm beginning to enjoy the view, to feel the cool breeze on my face. With my constant, delightful, wondrous companion, the living God, I am learning to follow. We're all needing to learn to follow that higher authority that is there. Jesus said, follow me. We teach the Christ is within you. God is all around us, as little Lizzie taught Mr. Old Man. God is sending messages, inner promptings to guide and help us through painful times, revealing. If you're awake, you're awake. God is our partner. He's there for the eternal ride. My advice, keep on pedaling. God bless you all.
Thank you for joining us for today's message. We invite you to be with us again next Sunday. Unity is inclusive, welcoming people of all walks of life in dignity and love. We believe that love, strength, and goodness dwells within you. May we all live in unity with God, humanity, and all of God's creation. And remember, as Reverend Caesar says, life is meant to be good.